Hey guys, it's me Seren, back with another video. They are doing some work outside, so you guys might be able to hear that. Hopefully it's not too distracting. I'm going to try and talk really loud just to make sure you guys can hear me over that noise. This is going to be the Lovecraft Country Episode 3 review and recap. As a part of this whole interactive sort of special event that they're having this weekend. Episode 4 actually is already available. It came out early yesterday, Friday, for streaming. I have not watched episode 4 yet, so I'm still just going to be doing my standard review for episode 3, because yeah, I didn't know they were going to do that, obviously. So, Lovecraft Country, episode 3, Holy Ghost. This one had a really interesting opening with Letty in church wearing this beautiful, gorgeous church hat. I was like, okay, hat. There's this monologue from this unnamed person. I'm thinking that maybe it's her mother or someone like that, talking about, how Letty saved her, whoever this person is, and what will be Letty's mark on the world. And as she's sitting there in church, seeing these people worship and praise, she's crying. It's a very sort of interesting cold open that is actually not related to anything else we directly see during this episode, but we also know previously from things that she said in episode 2, that when she said that prayer, it was something that she remembered from her childhood. So I'm curious to see how that's going to sort of loop back around. But we saw that as a kind of cold opening before we got a very different title card than what we've seen before. It was very pulp. It was very John Carpenter. It was very, I want to say Stephen King, but I know that Stephen King borrowed a lot of those stylings from John Carpenter. It was very like John Carpenter's The Thing. It was this horror. We saw these this house with these roots under the ground in the house, and then this body, this skeleton in a coffin popped up. Lovecraft Country. It was just very straight up horror, and I was with it. I was like, okay, we're gonna do something a little different. I like it. Let's go. So we learned over the course of this episode that Letty has bought a house. We kind of again just sort of jump right in, even though we know in the previous episode that we've seen, Uncle George has died. They've recovered Tick's father, but in this episode, we don't really see any immediate follow-up to that. We actually open on Letty and her sister, Ruby, and she's revealing that she bought this house. We have no idea with what money. We have no idea how she actually got this house. Before we see her and her sister walking through her house as she shows off this property, there's this sort of secondary title card about how 8 Negro men and women moved into a house in Chicago and were never seen again. Day 1, horror, really sticking to this horror movie style for this episode, which was really, really interesting to see in TV. So we see that Letty tells her sister that she bought this house in a white neighborhood, and she's going to turn it into a boarding house. She's going to turn it into a safe place for Negroes. Now she wants her sister to just move in, and she's like, I want us to be close. I want us to be sisters. I want to help you out after all of the things that you've done for me. This house has an elevator, but the whole time, it's giving you very standard, when the horror movie starts and the people have just bought the house and they're so excited about the house and they're like, yeah, and I got it for a steal. And they're trying to, sort of convince the friend or family member to go along with it. This grand vision that they see for this really decrepit property that's obviously spooky as fuck, haunted as fuck. They were playing around with that type of themes and imagery. And then she's like, yeah, and it even has an elevator. And of course they open it and they lean in. And of course it's not working. And it fucking falls on her. And her sister, grabs her back. And the first thing I thought, she probably got this place for free because it's haunted. And her sister's like, that's not funny. Very, very, one of those type of openings that, again, sort of reminded me of Cabin in the Woods. I don't know why my mind just keeps going to Cabin in the Woods with a lot of the stylistic choices that they're making. But Cabin in the Woods was a very tongue-in-cheek horror movie that played around with and subverted a lot of horror ideas and tropes, and they're doing a lot of the same things in this episode of Lovecraft Country. So that reminded me a lot of Cabin in the Woods, the way that it opened up. One good thing Joss has done a few good things. Let me not do Joss like that, but fuck Joss. Although I don't know if it was intentional or not. This plot line of Letty buying this manor and turning it into a safe haven and a boarding house for Negroes. Also reminded me of Mary Cardwell Dawson. I did an episode, a walking vlog, sort of Black Americans Extras episode with Paul in Pittsburgh, where we went to what was known as the Mystery Manor in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where Mary Cardwell Dawson, who was a singer and organizer, she created the Negro Opera League and had like a merry band of traveling, singing Negroes that traveled all over the country performing and entertaining. And they lived and trained and worked in this huge old Victorian manor that she owned in Pittsburgh, where she also taught music classes. And she also ran it as a boarding house. So for all of the Black American entertainers that came through to perform in Pittsburgh, but they couldn't stay in the segregated, hotels or boarding houses, she ran this boarding house for Negroes. And it was all very mysterious. They literally called it the Mystery Manor. It was believed that she had ties to the mob. It's just this really interesting, juicy story that I have loved ever since I heard about it. I will include links in the description box to some information on that, including my video on it. But this idea of, sort of a Black woman buying this property to create a safe haven for other Black people in this neighborhood, again, something that is really, ripped right out of history, ripped right out of real life. So I appreciated seeing that. We see Ingenue Ellis, and this was the scene where I realized sort of like when this was. I was like, okay, so this is definitely quite a bit of time has gone by since Uncle George's death. We see her ripping up his book, his favorite book, Dracula. And it was really interesting because throughout the course of the episode, we see people sort of like checking in on her, and we see all these people, our main characters, kind of trying to act as if they're okay, but then internally they're really falling apart and trying to deal with what happened, and deal with the death of George, who was really a central figure and a binding character for all of the characters in a lot of ways. So it's really interesting that they decided to kill him off. Again, I don't know if this happens in the book or not, but it's really interesting that they decided to kill him off. And then we kind of see his brother, Montrose, Atticus's father, sort of in his place, in the way that these people interact with his brother versus the way that they interacted with Uncle George is really interesting. The way that they played around with this family dynamic of these two men that are brothers, and yet they're received so differently by the family members, and their interaction is so different. We see that Tick has been staying with his aunt Hippolyta and his cousin Diana, which I don't know if they actually said Dee's full name before this episode. If they did, I didn't catch it. To me, that felt like a reveal that they are named after Wonder Woman, Hippolyta, and Diana. We see that Tick has been staying with Hippolyta and Dee, and that he's been, kind of trying to help around the house and help out with them and, be there for them since Uncle George is now gone. But all of them, I don't want to say they're grating on each other, but and Ingenue Ellis is amazing, as she always is. She's so emotive, even just without saying a word. The scene where she's ripping the pages out of the book, and then later on, Montrose finds the book and it's Dracula, and he says oh, it was George's favorite. And so then we learn that she's really taking out her anger, her sadness, her frustration, on having lost, her love, and also not knowing exactly what happened and not really believing the story that she's being told. But we originally see this just in her ripping the pages out of this book, but Tick is sort of trying to help out. We find out that the publisher of I think they call it the Negro Motorist Guide, but the Green Book has been calling because it's over a month due, and Hippolyta's oh, I'll take care of it. And then Tick is oh, I already did. I hope that's okay. And then she kind of was taken aback a little bit. Well, I didn't look over it. And he's yeah, sorry, He's around. He's trying to help out. They're sort of starting to grate on each other. Hippolyta, I don't want to say that she doesn't trust him anymore, but she's not exactly 100% sure what's happening. Dee, you can tell, loves having her older cousin around. They're very much bonded, and he's helping her by being there. But something about him being there is rubbing his aunt the wrong way. And so then he goes to see his father, who we know that they have a very bitter and embittered relationship. So he goes to see his father at his father's apartment and is like, I've worn out my welcome there. I need to stay somewhere. And we already know that this is going to be tense because we know previously that they've gotten a fight in this apartment. There's literally a hole in the wall from them fighting in this apartment. And he also says to his father, and I think we should tell Hippolyta what really happened. And his father, Montrose, amazing, brilliant performance from Michael K. Williams. Really, really loving this cast thus far. What are we going to do? We can't say what happened. Like, we can't explain what happened. You know, Uncle George was shot and killed during like a magical ritual. They've just told the story that, you know, they wandered into the wrong place and he was shot and killed by a racist sheriff. They brought his body back. They had a funeral. So that's the story and they're sticking to it. And Montrose is like, we're just going to leave it at what it is and we're just going to try and move on. But it's like Tick's conscience is eating away at him. And I also feel like the fact that his conscience is eating away at him and knowing that they're lying to his aunt and that they're lying to Dee and feeling like they should say what really happened, that's also making his interactions with his aunt very strange, you know, like he's guilty, you know, like, and he's acting like somebody that knows something. And she can tell that they all know something and they're not telling her. Tick and his father are sitting at the table and they're having this, and his father's drunk. You know, his father's a drunk. He's taking care of his father. He throws water on his father, to get him up. We have this clear role reversal where, again, Tick's beloved uncle is gone. You know, this beloved family member is gone. And his hated father is back. We learned that the opening scene, that when Tick was dreaming, that it was kind of like Korean War meets A Princess of Mars, and then Jackie Robinson showed up, R.I.P. Chadwick Boseman, and sort of defeated the monsters with a bat. We learned that this was based off of a story that his father and uncle used to tell all the time about how they were surrounded by white boys when a mysterious stranger came out of nowhere with a bat like Jackie Robinson and saved them by hitting home runs over their heads. And all he said before disappearing was, "I got you, kid." All this is what we saw previously in episode 1 play out in this dream. He says, I heard that story so much, it was like I was there with y'all. So I just felt like that added another layer, obviously, of meaning and symbolism to that dream, because it's definitely just this history meets family, meets legacy, meets racism, meets Lovecraft, sci-fi. It's just such an interesting tone. And I really have to applaud Misha Green for, the writing, and it's very clear, and just her show running capability, because this is something that I think could go left really, really fast, and become too campy or become too, like as if we're treating racism like fiction, and it seems like she has a very tight grip. She's holding very tightly on the reins of the tone of this show, the genre, where she wants it to go. Even within this episode, which took a different tone with this overtly horror vibe, it's never too much. I have not yet gotten to a point where I feel like it's too much. I just realized we're already like 10 minutes in, and I did not say it. This is going to be in the good, the bad, and the ugly format. I would say that this episode, episode 3, is my favorite episode thus far. I absolutely had no bad and no ugly this episode whatsoever. I just didn't. So as we see Tick and his father discussing whether or not they should tell Hippolyta what really happened, they get into this very tense argument where he's like, well, if Uncle George was here, well, he's not. Well, if he was here, he's not here. He'd be saying we need to find out. He's not here. Train. I was just like, oh my gosh, amazing scene. And there were so many scenes. There were at least 3 scenes in this episode where I was just like, this is a perfect scene. Like, banged his hand on the table, the train went by, the classical music is playing, because before they started having this conversation, he put the classical music in the record player. Just amazing composition, and the way these shots and these frames are set up. Again, the music choice, the sound, the audio, the sound mixing and the sound of the train, the use. There's been a lot of use of sound, not necessarily even music, but there's been a lot of use of sound and excellent sound direction and mixing to create tension, to create a sense of dread or foreboding. There's been a lot of use of sound to really set the tone and the tenseness for this show. Again, brilliant, 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 brilliant scene. We see Letty moving everyone into the house. Her sister Ruby moves in. her friends, black artists. There's a novelist, James, with a dog named Baldwin, which was obviously a nice nod to James Baldwin. Tic comes over to visit and see her, and she invites him to stay, which originally he says no, that he has to leave and go back to Florida, which I thought was kind of interesting because we literally just saw him, like, ask his father for a place to stay. And I was like, sir, like, you do need somewhere to stay. Like, you might as well stay here. I thought her house was beautiful. I love the set design. Even though it has a spooky, sort of worn-down vibe, it sort of reminded me of the house from Charmed. Like, I definitely felt like the house had some good bones, and it was really nice to sort of see the happiness of all of these, like, black artists and young black people that are moving in, you know, and feeling like, oh, they finally, you know, they have somewhere to go that's, you know, a safe haven, you know, like, oh, we're gonna have a big party, like, it doesn't matter what these white people think, you know. It was just a beautiful scene. And then, of course, immediately we have a damper put on that scene by these, the white neighbors, these, like, 3 white boys that show up, and they blare the horns. They tie bricks to the horn, and all we hear is, grrr, and so just 24/7, this noise, grrr. So we know that it's not, you know, obviously it's not going to be easy, that these neighbors are going to make it a living hell for them. In addition to, obviously, the neighbors, the racism as horror, again, we have some actual supernatural, esoteric type of horror that's like some occult shit that's going on, because we see a whole disembodied arm pulling the covers off Journey. She wakes up, and then what does she hear? She goes to look out the window. Very interesting, which is just like a hallmark of this show thus far. Very interesting juxtaposition between the horror, the Lovecraftian ideology, and racism, you know, like, it's a whole fucking ghost in here, but you can't be sure, you know, because the whole point of blaring that noise all day and night long is to fuck with you, right? Is to make you feel like, oh my gosh, like, what is happening? Like, this fucking noise. It's hot as hell in the apartment. She goes down to the basement. The boiler is turned up, and the knobs are busted off. Was it the white racist that came in the night and did it? Was it the ghost that did it? While she's down there turning the boiler off, she hears this noise, this banging. She goes, and it's something trying to get out of a hole in the fucking basement. She calls Tic to go down in the hole with her because she's terrified. Of course, there's nothing in there. What does Tic say? Oh, you know, this kind of reminds me of tactics that we used in Korea, you know, light, noise, you know, to mess with people's minds, to get them to see things that aren't there. Yet at the same time, we know that within the canon of the show, within the universe of the show, the supernatural does exist. So again, just really making you feel like, what is it? What is going on? Is it the racism, or is it actually something supernatural? It's like the racism is supernatural level horror, because the whole tone and tension of this episode is just terrifying, scary horror, while these black people are trying to move into this house that they then find out it actually is haunted. It was, oh my God, when she's walking around in the dark and she has this flashlight and we see a fucking bear trap. Oh my gosh, the direction. I was just like, this direction, the suspense. There is a bear trap. Like, she just stepped over. I really thought my heart was going to, like, leap out of my chest. Like, that scene was, like, the second time where I felt like perfect scene. Like, perfectly directed. Like, what the fuck is banging down there? Why the fuck is there a bear trap down here? This is a fucking horror movie. Is something trying to get out of a hole? What the hell is going on? These fucking horns blaring outside of these racists. Like, this is an episode where I just really felt like they were just really hitting these notes of horror and racism, like, and horror, like, hardcore. I was taking notes. Like, I was really like, wow, this is how you do suspense. Like, and this was just, like, so suspenseful, this scene. Totally a different scene from the previous one that I felt was really perfect with Tic and his father, but just incredible tension, incredible suspense, incredible scene. So she gets terrified when she sees the fucking ghost trying to come out of the hole. She goes and gets Tic. They go down to the room. Of course, there's nothing down there. She's like, bro, like, I heard voices. I had shit banging. Like, you know, maybe it's the neighbors, but I think this motherfucking place is haunted. He's like, you know, I believe you. Like, I believe that you saw something, but with what we went through, the stress of it all, plus we're keeping the secret of how Uncle George really died. There's this excessive heat and noise that your neighbors, these horns blaring, like, these are the same, this is when he said, like, these are the same tactics that we tried to use in Korea to mess with the natives. And this was another very interesting role reversal, because in a previous scene, when Letty says to Tick, like, are you sure, when they don't remember the monsters, and she says to him, like, are you sure that you saw something or heard something? And he's like, yes, like, I'm not crazy because of what I saw. Now it's almost, again, a role reversal where he's like, with everything we went through, are you sure? But we, the audience, know. Like, we know something's going on. So that was very interesting to see a parallel. And then to see Tick sort of offer some emotional support to Letty. Letty goes to hold his hands, and then he backs away. Their relationship up until this point, and even through this episode, is very, they have all this, again, tension, all this sexual tension, all this emotional tension, all this, are we or are we not, what are we doing, especially considering we just went through this traumatic event together. And all of this kind of culminates in this episode later on with Tick and Letty having sex during Letty's housewarming party for the boarding house. He does attend the party. At first he's acting like he's not sure. He does end up attending the party. He wears his vet uniform, which a statement is made by one of the other people at the party, like, oh, that was a good idea to show the white neighbors that a vet, actually lives here, because that's something that they respect. Even though the show is not shying away from the duality of, Black American veterans not receiving the respect in this country, in a country that will draft us and send us off to war and then bring us back and still treat us like shit. I like that they included a line about that, the reason why he might have worn that. We see Letty, like, dirty dancing with this guy, and this other dude is like, if that's your girl, like, you might want to let her know, like, what are y'all, what are y'all doing? Which I felt like, as the audience, we've also kind of been thinking, like, what are they doing? And they just end up having sex. Letty starts bleeding. Turns out she was a virgin. As soon as they showed her bleeding, I was like, is she a virgin? But then she kind of covers it up, and she's like, oh, I didn't realize I was on my monthly. Like, this is so embarrassing, da-da-da-da. And later on, they do talk about it, which I'm going to get to that a little bit later. But I want to know, what are some of you guys' interpretations of that scene? Because I'm curious to know what did you guys think of that. Another thing that happens at the housewarming party is that Hippolyta and Dee do come to the party. Hippolyta actually ends up bringing all of the food for the whole party, and she said that it's because she has so much food, like her icebox is overflowing from people that keep stopping by and bringing food, because her husband died. I thought that was a really nice cultural nod to some of the things that we as Black Americans do, after someone has died in a family. And she kind of threw this little jab at Tick, like, we have more food than we could ever even eat, even with Tick eating more than his fair share. And Letty, she's talking to Letty, and Letty's kind of like, what's the deal? Like, what's going on with, like, you and Tick? Like, is he bothering you? Like, are you upset? Like, what is up? And then she says something that Tick does that Uncle George used to do with the dishes. And so Letty's like, is that it? Is that the problem? Like, does Tick remind you of Uncle George? Just again, well, she didn't say Uncle George, she says George, but just again, these sort of subtle reminders that George is gone, and that now we sort of have these other men, be it Tick in Hippolyta's house, or be it now Montrose that has returned, that are sort of in his place, but they're not George, And we've spent a lot of time with George. We've gotten to know his personality thus far. Again, we kind of recognize that he's sort of the glue that's holding these people together in a lot of ways. And so it's very interesting that they're not shying away, which I would have felt some type of way if they tried to just, like, let it go and, like, gloss over it, like, okay, now it's 3 weeks later and everybody's fine. So I like that they're not shying away from the fact that there is this hole, there's this hole that, what are we going to do about this hole? We also see that the kids that have been sort of dragged along to this party, they're up in the attic, they're playing with a damn Ouija board. I'm like, why are y'all playing with this Ouija board? And George shows up. I don't know if this is our George, Uncle George, or if this is one of the ghosts in the house named George, because we do find out that the house is, in fact, haunted, but the Ouija board spells out George, and Diana gets really upset. She thinks the kids are fucking around with her, being assholes, because everyone knows her father just died, and his name was George. But maybe I missed if it was explained if that was like one of the ghosts in the house or not. I didn't catch all of their names, but there was definitely a ghost named George in the attic messing with the kids. All throughout the episode, we see these disgusting ghosts with like mouth ripped out, arms missing, limbs missing, bloody, gory. Like, this is not going to be the episode for you if you are really sensitive to blood and gore. Like, I looked away a few times, like, y'all know me, like, I'll be like, and then I look back, So, because I'll feel sick, like, I'll feel nauseated by that type of thing. But all throughout the episode, we see these bloody, gory ghosts. Even when Tick and Letty have sex, before they have sex in this, like, bathroom or wherever the fuck they are, we see that there's a ghost in there with Letty. And when he first ran in, I literally wrote in my notes, like, they need to decide what they about to do with this sexual tension. And then as soon as they start having sex, I was like, they doing it in there with the sex ghost watching with the messed up arm. Like, there are ghosts everywhere all throughout this house. And Letty ends up doing research on, well, rewind. In the middle of the party, a burning cross is set up on the lawn. So now the Klan is absolutely involved. They say, oh, everybody grab the shotguns from the closet, you know, like, everybody go get the kids, you know, like, this is a terrorist attack. I'm absolutely floored that they showed this and that they showed it, you know, something like this from our perspective. It's a terrorist attack. This is domestic terrorism. We have to be able to protect ourselves against this white violence. Grab the shotguns from the closet. Letty got a bat. She runs outside. She starts busting up these white people cars while gospel music plays. Like, this is an anointed moment. She's busting up the cars in her beautiful party dress, like slow-mo with the cross burning in the back and the gospel music. Make the devil mad. Another perfect scene. Perfectly staged, perfectly executed. Hits on all of the notes and the tones that they want to show, you know. And then the police come and they arrest Letty and they have her in the back of the car, and he's just being completely racist towards her, you know, like he calls her a monkey. He says, you know, like, oh, what are you, the head of like the Monkey Urban League, or is it the National Association for the Advancement of Cockroaches? You know, like, he's racist as fuck. And then we see him put his hand in this loop, and my first thought, they about to start swerving and smacking her around in the back of this car. What do? They start swerving and beating the shit out of her in the back of the cop car. And do you know who was murdered that way in Baltimore, Maryland? Freddie Gray. That is a practice that they still do to this day. They lock up black Americans in the back of these cop cars and these vans, and they jostle us around, broke Freddie Gray's spine and all that. They are really pulling from real life for the stuff that they are putting in this show. Like, it's real. The police officer ends up inadvertently revealing to Letty who the previous owners of the house were and what the name of the house are, because he asks her, you know, like, who helped you buy this house or told you to buy it? And then he reveals to her, we found the body parts of 8 niggers buried in that room below the basement where she saw the ghost trying to get out. So, and he calls it the Winthrop house. She ends up looking into the Winthrop house. As we know, Letty is a photographer. She ends up turning the space underneath the basement into a dark room. While she's developing the pictures that she took from the housewarming, she sees this weird line. There's shit all over the pictures. I also feel like this red, you know, this red light, the red room, the dark room is another classic sort of horror staple. You know, you're looking at the pictures in the dark room and you notice a lot of classic horror staples utilized. But she takes the pictures down, she rearranges them on the floor, and it's a face, and a goddamn fucking ghost comes up out of the picture. Get out of my house! Letty, the house is haunted. The house is haunted, sis. It's haunted. Letty reveals to her sister that she thinks the house is haunted because her sister's talking about, you know, like how it was so irresponsible that Letty smashed up those cars, and, you know, that she's always causing trouble, and what is she going to do? You know, all the boarders are moving out because now the house is, you know, not a safe environment, and she's kind of giving Letty this lecture. And Letty basically is like, bitch, I really don't fucking care. Like, this house is haunted. Like, you don't even know what the fuck. Like, bitch, I just seen a fucking ghost. Like, you don't even know what the fuck I just seen? Like, and it just slips out. She's like, you know, and it really doesn't matter if they move out or not, because I still have some of the money left that mama left, so I'll be fine. Ruby says, record skip? What money? So initially we think that, because we know their mother recently passed away, Ruby, Marvin, and Letty. We know their mother recently passed away, and that Letty didn't even attend the funeral. Letty reveals that she got a call from the bank stating that their mother left her some money, that she used that money to buy the house. She went through a black realtor in their neighborhood named JJ. They end up getting into this huge argument and this huge fight because Ruby's basically like, you didn't even come to Mama's funeral. Like, I can't believe you didn't tell me and Marvin that Mama left money, and, why would she leave it to you? Like, you don't even care about her. And Letty's like, I really don't know why it was left to me. I didn't want to tell you guys because I didn't want to hurt you. And then Ruby makes this point where she's like, you've taken help from me. You've taken help from us all these years, even monetarily. And you couldn't even return the favor and let us know about the money. Like, you said you bought this house to, like, help our people and for me and you to be sisters again. But this whole time you've been lying. You've been lying to me about where the money came from. And all you've done is move in your artist, hippie, activist friends. It's all very, like, you're this hippie, There's clearly some type of, like, cultural clash is not the right word, but it almost seems like Ruby is more like old school minded while they have Letty set up as the forward thinking. Now they're playing a fine line with this. I hope this doesn't, I'm not going to put this in the bad, but they're playing a fine line with this. I hope this doesn't devolve into some sort of colorism with the light skinned one being the kind of forward thinking one and the dark skinned one being like the real niggerish, one that just wants to, like, keep her head down and, like, keep moving on. They're flirting with that, but I hope that's not the direction that it goes. But I have it in the back of my mind. And I did feel like her sister had a point, I felt like it was fucked up that Letty just took the money and didn't say anything, especially considering that's how she bought the house, which she then invited Ruby to move into. Like, that's a big lie. That's a big lie to be keeping from your family members, and especially from your sister that you now live with. So I thought that was interesting. They have this big blow up, and then Ruby moves out. Now, of course, spoiler alert, spoiler alert, spoiler alert, as you guys know. In the very end, in some of the last scenes of this episode, we find out that Letty's mother, in fact, did not leave her the money. Christina Bretway shows up at the end of this episode, and it appears that she has bought out JJ. It looks like JJ, the black realtor, is moving out of his establishment or something like that, and she's moving in. We find out that she's the one that arranged for this mysterious inheritance, this money to come to Letty, and that she's the one that kind of, like, pulled these strings to get JJ to show Letty this house, this Winthrop house, so that Letty would end up buying the house. I'm going to get to that a little bit later, but it's very, very interesting that Christina basically directly ended up being responsible for this huge blow up and this split between Letty and her siblings with this fake inheritance. So a lot of you guys have commented saying that you didn't feel that Christina was being set up as a love interest or a sympathetic figure. A lot of you guys said you felt like she was being set up as the primary antagonist, not the protagonist, the primary antagonist, especially now that all the other Brett Whites and everybody are dead and died in the lodge. So it does look like you guys were correct if the end of this episode is any indication on what she's going to be doing moving forward. So, after the police officer lets it slip that it was formerly known as the Winthrop House, Letty basically, she's going through it. Like, Tick meets up with her scribbling in a bar. She has all these maps, pictures, and newspapers, and informations, and she's like, my house is haunted. Yeah. The police beat the shit out of me in the back of the police van, the police car, and the police officer let it slip that he called it the Winthrop House. So I'm trying to figure out, what does that mean? And she basically dug up that the last owner of the house was a scientist who was fired for unethical practices, which included experimenting on humans. His name was Hiram Epstein, and that the police officer was working with the scientist and working with the owner to supply sort of an unending stream of Black Americans with test subjects, Black Americans from the South Side, and he was just like experimenting on us, which is why he said, like 8 niggers have disappeared in that house. And she was looking at the photographs that she took from the day that they were moving in, and they showed these really creepy photographs with these double faces, and she's like, I found all 8 of their faces. These are lost souls trapped in my house, we have to figure out what we're gonna do. Tick kind of takes the side of, we should just move out, it's dangerous. And it seems like Letty is kind of taking the side of, we need to free them. We need to figure out a way to get them out of here. So I felt like that interaction was really interesting as well, in that we can see Tick as being between his uncle George and his father Montrose. Because in some ways we can see that Tick, he loves speculative fiction. He loves sci-fi, he loves horror, he loves fantasy, he loves B-movies, he loves all of these things that were introduced to him by his Uncle George. But on the other side, like, he is a vet. He has seen real life horror. He does understand real life racism. He does have this like bitterness side, this sad side, this side that is more like his father. And in a lot of his interactions with Letty, it's almost like he's taking this paternal role towards her, like the way that his father did with him, of like, well, we should just move out, we should just move out, we should just try and, we have to do what's safe, what's logical, it's not our problem, very interesting play on these interpersonal relationships, and really interesting showing these Black American characters and figures as being truly multifaceted, which is something that we just don't see very often, and I feel like HBO has been doing a really good job with that. This is also the conversation that Letty lets it slip that she was a virgin, which I'm wondering if that's going to have some type of significance later on. And they discuss how they've just been holding so much in, this traumatic event that happened to them, and Uncle George dying, and even Letty dying, because if you'll remember, she got shot, she died, and she did come back to life. And she came back extremely hysterical and with a full understanding of what happened to her. And she says during this conversation that she's felt like ever since she came back, like something has been missing. So I'm wondering, like, was a part of her soul left behind? What is up, She did die and come back, like, she's low-key a zombie, like, she's sort of the undead right now, and that she's been sort of searching, she's like, since I've been back, I feel like a ghost, like something's missing, and she says, I thought the world was one way, and I found out that it isn't, and that terrifies me. And that exact line in which she's talking about, to me, felt like classic Lovecraft. Like, I thought the world was one way, and I found out that the world is, huge and vast, with this these cosmic supernatural threats sort of around every corner, and now I've moved into this house, and the house is haunted, and it's terrifying me, and I just don't know what to do. Classic Lovecraft. And just even more layers, even more ironic when you consider the fact that it's a black person, two Black Americans having this conversation, and that race and racism and, white supremacy was the basis for a lot of how terrifying, why Lovecraft found the world to be terrifying. Like, the world is a terrifying place full of threats, like these niggers, and so his way of channeling that fear, which is white fear, which is, fear of Black people, into all these cosmic ideas about monsters in the universe being this vast, scary place. And so to have Letty say this, and to have Letty and Tick be having this conversation, it's just really flipping the Lovecraftian ideals and ideology just on its head. Like, it's so smart. It's so fucking smart. Brilliant. So they have a woman come in, a Creole woman, to perform a ritual, to like an exorcism, to sort of get the ghost out of the house. They have a damn goat blood sacrifice right on the front porch in front of the whole neighborhood. They put the blood X's on their foreheads, and then they go down into the room below the basement to chant and do the ritual. And then, like, some Constantine shit fucking happens, and the ghost, I don't know if the woman died, but it looked to me like they killed the woman. Like, she was like being smacked by these like invisible forces into the ceiling and into the floor. It turns out that the doctor, the scientist Hiram, obviously he's still in the house. He's an avowed racist. When these Black people moved into his house, that he kept appearing, get out of my house, get out of my house. And so he's trapped in the house along with the souls of the Black Americans that he murdered in there and experimented on, who are the ghosts that we've been seeing throughout the episode, looking, really gruesome and basically torn apart, because he literally tore their bodies apart to do these sick experiments. There was definitely a pregnant woman. We see like a woman holding like a fetus. I don't know how many of you guys noticed that. A lot of these ghosts had very specific details. We see what looks like a basketball player with like a baby's head attached, Very gruesome experimentations, which also stems from reality. Like, medical apartheid. Like, Black Americans were gruesomely experimented on throughout history, from the Tuskegee experiment to modern day gynecology. You know, gruesomely experimented on. So the use of again, these real world elements as horror and horrifying in the show was just exceptional. So the ghost of Hiram sort of kills or knocks out the woman that they have with them, and then possesses Tick. Terrifying. You guys know I'm so scared of possession. And he's just like, get out of my house, bitch! And his eyes are black, and the oh my gosh, and stuff is flying, and the special effects that they use, his head, and it's blurry. Oh gosh, it was scary. It was so scary. It was like a Halloween episode. And Letty ends up sort of calling on the spirits, you know, like, please help me cast him out, like, help me, like, I want to free you, you know, like, and she keeps chanting, and they all form a circle, and they cast him out of Tick, and they cast him out of the house, and then we see their bodies sort of, like, transform from just these, like, mangled corpses to how they were previously, and then they sort of leave, which I hope means that their spirits got released from the house. And then, you know, later on, like, Letty's in the house, and she's giving an interview to a reporter about opening a Black boarding house in this neighborhood, and now the elevator works. Oh my God, I totally left out. While they were doing their exorcism, the 3 white boys from the neighborhood come literally at the exact same time. So again, drawing these parallels between the supernatural and the racism, the real life racism, you know, really closely linking them. Like, the show does not let you forget that these two things are linked, that racism is fucking horror and terror and terrifying. At the same time that they're having the exorcism, these 3 white boys are breaking into the house, and they end up being murdered by the ghosts in the house. There's like this room. This room has to have some type of significance, but it wasn't explained in the episode, because earlier Hippolyta, Angelina Ellis, who we know loves the stars, she hears whispering coming from the room, and the door opens. She goes in, and she sees this like beautiful golden, I don't know what it's called, I'm sure you guys know, astronomy model, galaxies and universes. And then later on, these white boys hear whispering coming from that same room. They go in, and they're murdered. They're dismembered, disemboweled by the ghosts, and they end up putting the bodies in the basement in what appears to be an underground tunnel. Now, I don't think we're meant to think that Letty or them put the bodies in there. I think we're meant to think that Letty and them never even knew that the white boys were in the house. This is just my interpretation. You guys can let me know if you disagree. Because the way that they showed it, when Letty shows the reporter the elevator, they get in the elevator, they get out, and the camera is like behind the elevator. Loved this scene. Loved the cinematography and the way that they chose to film and frame this scene. The camera's behind the elevator. It's in this fixed point. And when the elevator goes down, we see sigils. We see these like runes written on the walls, glowing, which makes me think that this Winthrop house, which was built by this dude whose name was Winthrop, Christina talks about it later on, which I'm going to get to, it's related to the Lodge, and it's related to the Brett Whites, and it's related to the Order of the Dawn and this magic. I'm thinking that maybe Christina is going to want this house. Obviously, this house has something to do with it. I'm thinking that maybe Christina is going to want this house to be like the new headquarters for the new Order of the Dawn, which I'm also maybe hypothesizing that she's going to try to rebuild the Order of the Dawn, maybe have it be all women, or, you know, with herself as the leader, you know, like I'm a woman, you know, some woman power type shit, even though it's racist as fuck, which is how white women love to do it. So I'm thinking she kind of manipulated Letty into buying this house, because the elevator goes down. We see these sigils, you know, carved into the walls, and then it seems like the elevator goes all the way down into further past the basement into what even appears to be an underground tunnel. And there's dozens, if not hundreds of bodies going through this tunnel, and the 3 white boy bodies are down there as well. So I kind of felt like it was insinuated that they didn't even know that those white boys broke into the house, that it was like the house itself maybe even has some type of power. The ghosts put them down there. I don't know. We'll see where that goes. The final exorcism scene, Journey Smollett, after her ass off in that motherfucking scene, she was screaming, crying, tears, snot, just really putting on her performance. I don't know, and it's wild to think, like, I don't know how much of that was like special effects, like how much of that was like actual real people in a room with her, and how much of that was just like her screaming acting like screaming into the abyss, screaming into an empty room. But she was just, it really felt like something deep and like guttural was just like coming out of her soul of like, get this man out of here, like get the fuck out of my house, like get him out of my house, like, like he experimented on us and he killed my people and he's still in this house fucking with us, like get the fuck out, get out. And knowing that she just went through this traumatic experience where she died and came back and feels like something is missing, and just this huge culmination of all this trauma. I almost felt like it was also meant to be a metaphorical exorcism as well for Letty to like release some of that stuff that she has been holding onto for the last couple of episodes. And Journey was just really felt like she was like acting from the depths of her soul. Like she was acting her ass off. Like the acting remains top notch on this show. And last but not least, after they've sort of cast the demons out of the house, Tick sees Christina Brettwife in town. He sees her in JJ, the realtor's office. JJ moves out. He goes in to talk to her. This motherfucking witch bitch freezes his ass. He got a gun out like he about to shoot her. He's like pulling the fucking trigger. Nothing is happening. I'm like, this bitch, like, which bitch? Like, she is so powerful for real. And she's really like, really? Like, you really thought she was about to come in here and shoot me? Like, motherfucker, I have magic. Like, I have magic, number one. And then, like, the last thing she says before she leaves is, like, and some racist shit. Like, and you know you can't kill a white woman in the middle of town. Like, what were you thinking? Like, you know you will be lynched, like, right away. Like, and it was almost like on some, and I still need you. You know, like the Order of the Dawn. Like, we still need you. We still need your blood. Like, I got plans for you, nigger. Like, what the fuck? Like, I'm going to need you to be a little bit more smart. But he goes in to confront her, and he's like, now, what are you doing in here with the nigga JJ? Like, Letty's mama didn't leave her no money, did she? And she's like, no, you know, like, I arranged it. And he's like, and what is the significance of this Winthrop house? Like, why did you want us living in this house? Or, you know, me and Letty, like, involved, and especially Tig, and, you know, involved in this house. And Christina and her silver Bentley is basically like, yeah, Letty's mother, you know, she didn't inherit shit from her mother. And he says, like, and I knew that, you know, something was up because it was called the Winthrop House, and I remember seeing the name Horatio Winthrop, you know, on your father's weird-ass motherfucking religious face paintings. And then she says, you know, Horatio Winthrop was, in fact, a founding member of the Sons of Adam, of the Order of the Dawn, and that he vanished after stealing pages from the Book of Names. So now we're getting more mythology revealed. And that he tried to develop his own language because they speak this language of Adam. If you watch with the captions on, like, it even says, like, when the Korean woman, the soldier, jumped out and was trying to kill Tick, and she was, like, speaking in another language. You might have thought it was, like, Korean, but it literally says in the captions, like, speaking the language of Adam. So, basically, this dude, Horatio Winthrop, stole pages from the Book of Adam, tried to develop his own language and sect of the Book of Adam and to create his own spells, which is very, very difficult to do, that most of them cannot, in fact, you know, create spells or even use magic. Her father got to have invulnerability because he was trying to basically live forever, which we know from his whole trying to open a door to the Garden of Eden so he can, like, be immortal, live forever in paradise. But then he had to remove his invulnerability when he attempted to open the door, and that's how he died. And then she's like, but imagine if Horatio Winthrop's lost pages were found. Maybe they're somewhere in that house. You know, the language of Adam could finally be decoded in its entirety, and, you know, almost like, and I'm gonna be that bitch that finds these pages, decodes the language of Adam, and, like, rebuilds the sons of Adam, or maybe the daughters of Adam, and the Order of the Dawn to just be even better and more powerful than before. This is not what she said, but this is what I got from it. I'm paraphrasing. Even better and more powerful than before, and it's gonna be a woman at the helm, you know, and so call me when you're ready to learn about our family, because, you know, you can't just go around killing white women. You know, she knows exactly what the fuck she's doing. So I was happy to see that they're definitely not setting her up as some type of love interest. The fact that she says, like, call me when you're ready to learn about our family seems like they're definitely being set up as some type of, like, distant cousins, you know, cousin adjacent within the canon of the show. She's definitely being set up as an antagonist. You know, she's moving pieces all over the chessboard, kind of still manipulating these black people, our main characters, in a way that she wants. So I was happy that was kind of cleared up, because you guys know I wasn't sure. This is definitely my favorite episode thus far. I loved the horror element. I thought it was very different, very interesting. I thought it was nice to see an episode that focused on a different main character instead of Tick. This was really a Letty-driven episode, and yet we still got to see the fallout of Uncle George's death in the background. There was another really excellent scene between Hippolyta and Montrose, where Hippolyta's like, Anthony Ellis can fucking act. Hippolyta's like, something happened to my husband that you're not telling me. And he's like, what? What happened? And she's like, something. It's just delicious. So I feel Uncle George is definitely not coming back. Even though we do know that necromancy and people coming back from the dead is a possibility on this show, but since they had a funeral, they buried his body, and they're dealing with the fallout, I can assume that he's definitely not coming back, so bye to Uncle George. But I just love this episode. As you guys can tell, I love the direction, I love the staging, I love the cinematography, I love the tension, just some great, just delicious, tense moments, top-notch acting. Again, this was a Letty-focused episode, and Journey really carried it, especially with her last exorcism scene. Like, she was acting. Awards are deserved. Like, the teleplay was written by Misha Green, and she can really write as well. Like, it's noticeably great quality. Just, it's really a quality show. I definitely liked that. Again, like, pieces are being moved into place. The ruins and sigils on the walls of this house. Nice to know that this is not just a random house that Letty bought. It does have something to do, with the main storyline. All those bodies in the tunnel. What was up with that? Christina pulling strings for Letty to get money and buy this property. Winthrop being a founding member of the Order of the Dawn. How is this house? Is this house going to be the new home base? And I like that even though this is a pretty large cast, everybody has their own interactions. We see Letty interacting with Hippolyta. We see Hippolyta interacting with Montrose. We see Hippolyta, Tick, and Diana interact. We see Tick and Letty everybody gets their own little moment in the sun so that we are getting a really good sense of these characters, who they are, how they act, how they feel, what are their interpersonal relationships. Really interesting dive into an exploration of familial dynamics in this one between fathers and sons, husbands and wives, fathers and daughters, brothers, all these things. Everyone dealing with these issues and not sort of glossing over it. Even Christina got fleshed out a bit more, even with her limited screen time. This was my favorite episode. This is my favorite episode thus far, absolutely. I oftentimes feel like things that I watch are predictable. A lot of you guys know that that's also a huge gripe that I have with Jordan Peele. This is how I know he's not writing this shit. Because I feel like I wonder where is the show going to go. Every episode, I feel like I literally have no idea where the plot is going. They recovered Tick's father very quickly, especially for that to be the only plot point we knew about the show going in. It wasn't like a season-long search, where's Montrose, and then, they find him at the end. Like, they kind of found him right away, they found him, they blew up the lodge, and Uncle George died all within the first 2 episodes. And now we appear to be settling back home in Chicago with Letty buying this house and, all that. So I'm really curious to see where we're going to go. How is Christina going to sort of regroup the Order of the Dawn with herself at the head? I know she's going to do that, because don't you just love white power when it's a woman in charge, so we can call it woman empowerment? Don't you just love that, I'm really curious to see where it goes, because there's definitely some interesting themes on white supremacist values and white feminism, which I believe that Misha can handle beautifully, because her writing is just top-notch. And I also feel like they're setting up a parallel, because they also kept talking about Letty, how Letty is pioneering, and Letty is pioneering and pioneering. I feel like they're setting up some parallels between Letty and Christina, with Christina as a pioneering, twisted, racist leader, thinking she's doing something sort of amazing for women, because she becomes the head of a white racist male fraternal organization, that would be a really fantastic criticism of white feminism to witness, especially if it's going to be juxtaposed with what Letty is doing as a pioneer. Really interesting themes that were set up in this episode. I know episode 4 is already out. I have not watched it yet, but I'm most likely gonna still watch it on Sunday and stick to my regular schedule. But I know some of you have most likely already seen episode 4 by the time you watch the review. So please no episode 4 spoilers. This is just for episode 3. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. There will be links and information as always in the description box. Food for thought as always. See you guys next time. Peace.